So for those of you who don't know, and there's no reason you should know, I'm with the, I almost said Fund for Lake George, I had to catch myself, with the Lake George Association. I'm president of the association. As many of you may know, the Lake George Association recently merged with the Fund for Lake George, former executive director of the fund, and was very much part of the whole genesis of these salt summits. The Lake George Road Salt Reduction Initiative that began, losing count, but at least 7 years ago. So this has been a wonderful morning, and the first thing I want to say before I introduce our keynote here, one of our speakers, is just how grateful I am to everybody in this room and online. I mean, we are setting the pace. We really are, as noted here on this screen, leading the way in what it takes to reduce the use of road salt, from municipal to state, from the private sector, and everywhere in between. We're showing that not only can this be done, it is being done. We don't have to study it. We can study our results because the results are real, as you're hearing and seeing. We can solve the problem. We're doing it, and we can save money in the process. So I just, again, very grateful. This is so energizing, and I've heard the same sentiment from a lot of people over lunch, that they feel pumped was one term that I heard. So with that aside, it is my distinct pleasure and truly an honor to introduce a true friend of Lake George and a champion for all we hold dear about this priceless place that is the destination as well as home for many of us. Lake George is threatened, not just by road salt, excessive use of road salt, but on numerous fronts, and we are very fortunate to have a champion in Albany on our behalf, the Honorable New York State Senator Dan Stec. Dan's an Adirondack 46er. If anybody doesn't know what that means, he's climbed all the 46 peaks. He told me he's done 29 of them in the winter. So he's familiar with slippery slopes and slippery roads. He knows them both. He's a North Country native, and he understands what results require. And what is that? That's leadership, that's partnership. Dan embodies it. This event demonstrates it. So we're very, very fortunate to have Dan here today. He was at our first summit as a state assemblyman, and he's here today as our state senator. So without further ado, Dan, Senator.
Thanks, Eric. That was a very, very kind and generous introduction. But I hope that most of it's true. My commitment certainly to, to Lake George, hopefully, is without question. But I got to tell you, the issue of road salt and what we're here for today, and I've been to several of these salt summits over the years, and it's always interesting, when you see an issue, what it brings together for participation. And looking around the room, there's a lot of town supervisors here, there's some highway superintendents here, there's a lot of environmentalists here, there's some business people here. You've got an eclectic group of people that, in this instance, have a shared and common interest, and that's where you've got to start. With politics, it's about recognizing an opportunity and the timing. And so when you reach a critical mass, or when you see something that's unique, that here's a group of people that perhaps don't march in lockstep on every other issue, but this is an issue that's brought together a wide variety of people. That gets people's attention. It gets my attention, but more importantly, it gets attention of the leadership in Albany and the executive. And I think we've had a lot of success, not only in Lake George, but in the Adirondacks. We've got a lot more to do, and here to talk a little bit about that this morning, or this afternoon. But the idea that, we'll just, it's too expensive, we'll kick this can down the road, we'll let somebody else deal with it. The numbers are there, the data is real, and we can see what's happened in our Adirondack waterways. In some parts in the Adirondacks, I've got constituents that have water in their drinking wells, and it's coming from, or salt in their drinking wells, and it's coming from one place, it's coming from a highway application. That's not to say that anyone in the room is opposed to safe roadways in the winter, but technology has evolved, and we should be applying that. Now, this is my 22nd year in public office, and I started at the town of Queensbury as a councilman, and I remember very colorful and somewhat lovable to some, but to gruff to others, highway superintendent there, the late Paul Naylor. And I don't know how many, you got to be an old timer now like me, to remember Paul. But Paul, he had a highway first mentality. And I've seen, not to pick on Paul, but that's where we were, I think, in the 70s and the 80s, is that, hey, you know what, this environmental thing, it's a fad, and they're high maintenance, and they're making it difficult. What's important here is the road, and the law says road safety and public safety needs to trump everything else. And while it's still important, I think we've learned and evolved, and I've seen it in highway superintendents since. They've all, I think, taken a step more and more towards, let's find a way to coordinate, and if we can address both problems simultaneously, a willingness to do that. And our current Queensbury Town Highway Superintendent, Dave Dool, who I grew up and went to high school with, is in the audience today, and I know that he subscribes to that. But I'm encouraged, that around the region, a lot of small municipalities have embraced the new technology, the live edge, the brine application. I mean, it breaks your heart driving down the Northway to see rock salt bounce as it's getting distributed out of a highway truck into the woods, where it does the road no good, but certainly it finds its way into our lakes. And so, by finding ways to apply less of it where it's needed and not where it's not needed, so your cameras and your GPS, I mean, there's just the technology that's available today to the Dave Dools of the world that wasn't available to the Paul Naylors of the world, is our opportunity here. And so now you've got highway superintendents that, they're into technology. This isn't a, hey, you know what, if it's not a wrench and it's not covered in grease, it's suspicious, are over. And so that encourages me, and that's why, you got them here. Now, what can the state do, and what should the state be doing? Well, first, leading by example. And not to throw any any arrows at my friends in DOT, but a lot of our biggest applications are the biggest roads, and a lot of them are going to run where they run for topographic reasons. So they're running right along waterways and drainage basins. And so the Route 9s of the world, and the 9Ls, and certainly the interstate, that they're seeing a lot more salt. And I think DOT has come around. We at the state, I think, have, with the passage of the SALT task force legislation this year that I was a co-sponsor of, I think that, again, big bureaucracies turn slowly. I was in the Navy, so I think a lot of these things in terms of the ship, a small 20-foot boat can turn on a dime, but a big oil tanker, not so much. And your state bureaucracy is that big oil tanker. So, and I know that's frustrating to a lot of people in this room. I've talked about it in invasive species as an example before, where you've got people like Dr. Collins and others that, I'm sure if they haven't said it, I know they've thought it. I know the right answer. If they would just listen to me and give me the keys, I would fix this problem. And unfortunately, bureaucracies aren't always open to that, or it's hard. There's a process. But at the state, we've established a SALT task force. And I'm glad that on my recommendation, my Senate Republican Conference appointed Kevin Hadros, who's the Warren County DPW superintendent, and a Clarkson grad, and more importantly, a professional engineer. So here's a guy that, he certainly gets the job. He understands the job of road safety, but he also has an environmental and an engineering mind, where he understands that there are other problems besides just, how clear can I make this pavement, and at what cost? Cost is always a factor. So the SALT task force hasn't been fully seated yet, and it needs to start its work, and that's something that I and others have encouraged the executive, Governor Cuomo before, but now with a new governor in place, and as I mentioned to a couple people out before we came in, and I guess, part of why I'm here today is, all right, so I'm your state legislator. What is the state doing about this? What perspective can I share with all of you? because I think this is something that you can take away, and whether you're a municipal leader or whether you're an environmental group leader, you can bring this back to your organizations and consider this, that like all of us, no one ever likes to admit that they're wrong. I don't care who you are. No one likes to take ownership of a mistake. It's hard, just as human beings, and I never took a psych course in my life, but no one wants to say, I got that wrong, I was wrong here, I need to rethink that. It's harder for some than others, and our previous governor was the other end of the spectrum in spades. He was like the Fonz, right? I mean, most of you are old enough to remember Fonzie, right? He couldn't say, he would stumble over saying the word wrong. I was, he couldn't do it. And I think that perhaps it takes that kind of mindset and personality to rise to that level in politics, where you really, you don't take ownership of mistakes easily, because that becomes a political liability. But what we have now with a new governor is that we don't have that sense of ownership, that whatever shortcomings you saw in the law, in the way that we were seating the task force or embracing technology, that for 8 or 10 years you had one mindset and one administration that was pushing one message, and message discipline is important in our line of work. So now you've got a new person that is probably looking to establish their own bona fides and their own credibility on an issue, and to make friends and allies. I mean, that's what politics is about, serving your constituents. And if there's an opportunity for the new governor to come in and say, I've heard that there were errors made in the past, I'm going to be the person to correct them and get credit for it, God bless her. I mean, that's good politics. But it's an opportunity, whether it's a salt concern in our waterways, or broadband, or taxation, or criminal justice reform, or whatever the issue is, that you have an opportunity with a new governor to fix some things that maybe the previous governor that had an ownership of them didn't want to admit needed fixing. So with that said, a message coming out of an organization like this, a happening like this today, that communicated who was there, maybe not by name, but by organization. These are the groups that are in agreement. Because the other thing that politicians like is they like risk reduction. All right, so if you know that, hey, you know what, I got a bunch of North Country politicians, parenthetical Republicans, right? And oh, by the way, I got a bunch of environmentalists, parenthetical liberals, and they're all in agreement on an issue, there's less risk to me to say yes. I could be a hero to both. I can fix a problem without getting, crossfire. And that's, I think, exactly what happened years ago with invasive species, is that they realized in Lake George that they weren't going to address a problem and have one side or the other screaming that you messed it up. That, in fact, you had both sides coming together ahead of the state, begging the state to do something, and then all they had to do is just put it in the correct format and take credit for it and do the photo ops that politicians like to do. So, and again, I'm one of them. I tell everyone, you got to let us hand out the oversized checks. You got to let us kiss babies. But babies, you don't want to smell the hair or anything like that. Just kiss the babies, right? That's what politicians do, right? And it's part of our public outreach. And so in the opportunity to address an environmental issue, an environmental constituency is very important in New York State. It's important everywhere. And it's meandering that, that balance between keeping the economy moving, property rights, all the things that you've all been dealing with over the years. But in knowing that, hey, we really do have an issue here. And the data is clear. I mean, the data speaks for itself, and the technology also speaks for itself, that there's a way to improve the salt that's in our waterways and try to get it out or minimize its introduction. So again, I think you should be heralding the fact that you've come together, how many years it's been, and all the groups that have done this. As an aside, and as an outsider looking in, I saw great value in the LGA and the fund combining. I think that you now speak with an even stronger voice than before. I think that there were two giants before that moved the needle, but now in combining forces, I think that you have an even louder voice, and I think you should use it. And I know you have. You're well led, and you know what you're doing, and it's a privilege for me to just be supportive and associated with that. I'm proud of the work that, and I don't want to leave any of them out, but the Land Conservancy, we have a lot of really good not-for-profit organizations around Lake George. And again, this is beyond Lake George. I see that Supervisor Holzer is in in the room. So, it's a Lake Placid, a Wilmington. A lot of people don't know this, but Wilmington is the home of whiteface, not Lake Placid. Am I right, Roy? There you go. There you go. But Lake George is in a position, because it has a park commission, because it is special, and I don't mean special like they're not all special, but it is unique in its size and the fact that it has its own state agency that you have a partner in them as well. And I'm sure that they're not always as easy to deal with their bureaucracy too, and they have their own set of politics and funding that they have to be a little more concerned with their state government partners than maybe nonprofits do. But Dave Wick and his team, they're there. They are an ally in this fight. They have fought for funding, and they are trying to do that. So whatever we're learning, whatever lessons are being learned on Lake George are hopefully being applied on our other waterways throughout the park as well. So this is, I apologize if somebody's saying, gee, he keeps talking about Lake George. What about Cranberry Lake, or what about Schroon Lake or Brant Lake? I mean, there's hundreds of lakes that all have this problem. But the technology and the lessons that are being learned in Lake George, I think, can get applied elsewhere. And again, if I can just close with emphasizing, I think, the value of the political message that you all can share and what you should be asking for. Complete the legislative process. Let's move forward with the task force. Let's get this study done. Let's maybe bring DOT a little more on board and into the fold. And again, Josh, where's Josh? I apologize for picking on DOT, but you guys sometimes deserve a little bit. That you embrace the technology. You want it, and you're going to need funding. And I would rather spend an ounce of prevention is worth 10 pounds of cure, as my father says. It's not a pound of cure, it's 10 pounds of cure. And so the investment that we're making in these new technologies to protect our waterways, I think, is money well spent. And I just would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, and I thank all the partners, both municipal and private, state, and down to the village level, for the efforts that they've been putting in on this issue. And for myself and the vast majority of my colleagues, it's well received. We get it. And I believe the executive gets it as well. It's just a matter of keeping the pressure on, because there's so many other distractions going on in New York State. And admittedly, two big ones in the last year and a half, our governor problems and our COVID problems, and rightly so. So unfortunately, that takes bandwidth and resources away from focusing on things like the salt reduction task force. And I think now's the time, as one has been settled and the other one is, I think we're coming out of COVID. I mean, we're not done yet, but we're a lot better off than we were 6 months ago. And hopefully 6 months from now, it'll be really under control, and we'll be back to something that looks a little more normal as far as what your government is focusing on. So I don't know if you wanted any questions today, but those are the thoughts I wanted to share with everybody, and thank you for the work that you're doing all over the Adirondacks on the salt issue. Chris, or anybody? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and appreciate your time coming up and talking to us again.